Okay. Okay. I need to turn on my sound. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay. So as we listen to the sound of the bell, we can just settle into our seats, arriving here together. And this practice of inviting the bell comes from our Vietnamese teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. And this community was created out of this practice of mindfulness that Adriana and I have been part of this mindfulness community in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh for years. And this community arose out of that as a way to try to broaden our understanding of all people, all beings, so that we can better take care of each other. And sometimes this practice is called engaged Buddhism, this practice of bringing our Buddhism out into the world, our practice into the world. And I'll just share a very short quote from Thich Nhat Hanh on engaged Buddhism. He says, "Engaged Buddhism is just Buddhism. When bombs begin to fall on people, you cannot stay in the meditation hall all of the time. Meditation is about the awareness of what is going on, not only in your body and in your feelings, but all around you." And that's Thich Nhat Hanh from Lion's Roar a few years back. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adriana to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annie. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. We are really delighted to have tonight David Wu as our second speaker of the third speaker series on Asian American and Asian Pacific Islander Americans. The intention of this series is to counter the marginalization, erasure, and stereotyping of Asian American Buddhists by celebrating the diversity of this group as indispensable stewards and shapers of American Buddhism. David Wu works as a care specialist at Homeboy Industries, a nonprofit that serves high-risk, recently incarcerated and formerly gang-involved youth, as well as adults. He has also served as a counselor and mentor at Nan Noon, a faith-based addiction treatment center located in Koreatown, and as a mindfulness meditation group facilitator for youth serving sentences at juvenile incarceration facilities. David is currently in his final semester of Buddhist seminary, pursuing a Master of Divinity degree at the University of the West, and was the recipient of the 2020 semester of Justice Social Justice Grant by the Kaleidoscope Institute, an award recognizing rising faith leaders of color. David will speak on the causes and conditions of why so many Asian Americans have been made invisible. He will address issues facing Asian gangs, many who suffer from a kind of violence that is also invisible. The stigmatization of this violence makes it less likely to be seen or recognized. Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much, Shenting, for being here. And now I will pass the space to Chensing, who will tell us more about David and introduce the topic. Thank you so much, Chensing.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all here. Thank you to those of you who came to the first talk in this series last month. And it's just wonderful to see so many people here today. As you can tell from Adriana's bio, which I think only gives us a small glimpse into David's life, he's both extraordinarily busy and very accomplished, and someone that I really very much respect and admire. And I know when Adriana and Annie approached me to create a series, one of the first people that came to mind was actually David, but I also felt quite shy because there's so much going on, David, in his life. And I first came to know David actually through the Stanford Heinz Forum lecture. So on the website for this particular event, it's one of the videos that David provided a link for. And I just thought that David was very just exceptionally thoughtful and compelling in his speaking. And that particular panel was on perspectives on anti-Asian racism, faith, and identity. And it was also, I remember very clearly because it was the same day as my book launch for my book, Be the Refuge. And so it felt like there was this kind of karmic connection. And then I was fortunate enough to hear David speak again at the Buddhist community at Stanford. And he presented there on inner justice practice with a friend of his. And so I don't want to take up too much time, but I will say that I've been very honored to be able to have some Zoom tea conversations with David just about different things as in the Asian American Buddhist world. I think this is a topic that many of us have been thinking about a lot more. Well, I think Asian American Buddhists, we've been thinking about these issues possibly for our entire lives, or those of us like myself and David who came to Buddhism later in our lives, are, have been thinking about Buddhism since we've encountered it, and the intersection between that and racial justice and our cultural and religious identities. And I know that many people here on this call probably have a lot of reflections on this too. So I think I want to just turn it over to David, and I'm very excited to learn from him, to learn together, all of us in community.
Thank you. Just greetings to everybody. Just glad we're at where we are in this hopefully just it's continuing to just be steps forward out of this pandemic, moving towards just this within this racial reckoning as well. And hopefully we're just going forward and not backwards. Just very grateful to be here. Thank you for all the organizers of this wonderful Making Visible series. Had the pleasure of sort of meeting you virtually before, and just good to see your faces again. Chen Ching, I must have known you in a previous lifetime, because just in Korean, it's inyeon. There's a special like relational kismet that I'm so grateful for. My life has already been just so impacted. And most importantly, just everybody here that's present, and just very glad to meet you all. I hope this is just the seed, and we'll benefit, and we'll be able to see the fruits of this in for the rest of our lives. I'm a little technically, I'm just kind of in between. I just literally just left work. I'm with Homeway Industries. I'm in the youth reentry center. So that means we work with the ages of 14 to 21. So strange just looking at myself. Let me see if I could just pause for a minute. There we go. All right, so yeah, we work with ages from 14 to 21, and all of our youth have been system impacted. They're either directly involved with gang life, or they're formerly they've grown up in situations regarding gangs, poverty. Many of them have been incarcerated. So yeah, we have a summer program that's kicking off next week, and we have just a continuum of different activities and events and workshops. So we're getting ready to kick that off. So this is just kind of on my heart. There was a youth that was part of our program. I was just sharing about him. So we have youth that come from all over Los Angeles County. They overcome incredible obstacles just to show up for any given day. And this particular youth, he didn't have a relationship with his father. His mother was working his whole life. They'd been around to different countries as well. And it's just him and his mom for most of his life. He had siblings as well. And then, so he joined our program earlier this year, and we took him to go hiking to Griffith Park. It's just a sprawling network of trails with beautiful vistas of both sides of LA County. And some of our youth, they're not in the best shape. So I really love, part of my favorite things to do in terms of like contemplative time is to go hiking with my dog. I love just to feel the earth, just the dirt underneath my feet. So I can handle the trails fairly well. So we go take some youth, and including this one young man, and I would kind of double back just to check up on him and see how he's doing. And there was a time I went back, and he was a bit struggling as we got towards the peak, and he seemed a bit reflective. And I asked him what was going on. He said, my mother used to take me hiking. Like, we used to go hiking when we were young. And we finished the hike, and we took him to go eat afterwards. And then he said he needed a ride home. And it's Friday, we're approaching the evening. And so I said, sure, I'm gonna give you a ride home. And my coworker gave me a heads up. He said, hey, he just gave me that look. And I know that look, that means, are you sure? Because he lives really far. So that was the look. And I was like, sure, let's do it. So we're in Griffith Park area, which is just right off the 101. And he lives over in Canoga Park. And that's on a Friday evening in Los Angeles. That's quite a journey. So let's do it. So I take him, and he's living at some random apartment with just some homies, and he is young, doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a car, barely has enough to get by. So I was about to drop, I was literally on the street about to turn in, and I said, hey, how about I get you some groceries? Would that help out? And he said, yeah. And then suddenly he kind of perked up when he heard that. And he was like, he knew exactly the grocery store he wanted to go to. Took him there, and took some coordination because I had my dog with me, and there's COVID happening. We're at just coming off like the peak of the pandemic in Los Angeles. And so we traded places once his cart was ready, and I went in, or we were scanning the items, and I was really impressed. I was like, wow, this young man, his selection of groceries, he has like raw chicken, he has spices, he has mustard, he has cherries, just like not what I was expecting for him to buy. And then so I asked him about it as I was driving home, and he tells me what he has planned to cook. Yeah, he says he's gonna get the chicken, he got the spices, and he likes to rub the mustard because that like tenderizes and it gives it a certain flavor. And I was like, wow, I was really impressed by what he's saying. But underneath that, there's also the remnants of the trauma of having to grow up and having to fend for himself. Yeah. So still though, it's just, I was glad to have, seen this other part of him. And even when he was emoting as he was describing what he's gonna eat, he's like, it's gonna be delicious with that mustard. And so I was just listening to him. I was like, all right, you know what? How about we set up a cooking workshop for y'all? And he's like, yeah, that'd be great. Because with the younger youth, it'd be nice if we could arrange into groups like this, into some kind of dialogical practice, and just open up. But that doesn't tend to work out the best with the younger population. So we're like, yeah, let's try this cooking workshop. It took some months to get it going. I actually ran into a friend who's in Little Tokyo. She owns and runs Aloha Cafe. This is great little brunch Hawaiian restaurant in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. And she was like thrilled with the idea. Let's definitely do it. So we set it up. Our team set it up, the youth team, and we're going to do this cooking workshop. And meanwhile, I mean, we literally live just a mile from their neighborhood, but they've never crossed that bridge, yeah, or many of them have not. And so we set up that workshop, and unfortunately, the young man he did not continue with our program. And about a month ago, he overdosed and he died. But we still did the workshop, and the workshop was so touching just to be there. There's, you know, they're running a La Cafe. They just had a private space for us. There was youth there. There was also we had other recent parolees. We had one guy that he did 30 years in prison, 15 years of which in solitary confinement, and he's cooking up and making amazing food. And we had one youth, he tried the food after he'd cooked it, and then he said, he goes, "I've been eating shit my whole life." You know, he was just so thrilled with this experience, you know. And I still live in a certain reality where that young man was there, yeah. But I also just so grateful for the inspiration, and I thank him that we could go forth and still show up and still do the best we can and doing this work. And I say all this just also because you know, for me, the very framework, we're chaplain trained at University of the West, and furthermore, we're Buddhist chaplain trained. And so just how to serve and how to be present. I mean, it's one thing to say be present, it's another to practice it. And even for this, I just would even invoke, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Zen peacemakers. And, you know, in terms of, it's not just presence, but ministry of presence. And there's three core tenets for Zen peacemaker training. And it's the first is not knowing. And the second is bearing witness. And then the third is taking action, or as some would say, loving action. Yeah. So in this context, when I took the young man home, I have ideas about how to be a care provider or how to be there, how to drive them, right? But at the same time, that kind of goes out all the window. I mean, all of that goes out the window. It'll emerge. It'll just be as it is. And it's like Father Greg, the founder. Father Greg, for those that don't know, he's a Jesuit priest. He's the founder of our organization. And he has a quote. He says, "Close both eyes and see with the other one." And to me, that's what it means to not know. And the life will emerge just on its own, the relationship, the connection that we hope for. And then, you know, that's the bearing witness to it all, like no matter what happens, no matter what comes. And I'd love to say that, you know, it's all, once anyone comes to our program, it's all good, but there are great forces at work, and just kind of working with providing a change in causes and conditions so that the change that we hope for, the life that we seek, or the new life that we seek may come to light. And then, of course, you know, the loving action or the taking action. To me, it's like when we're in a sort of, when we're caught in this kind of storm of concern and worry and being aware of what may happen, there can be this sort of self-will urgency that takes and say, no, you must do this or this may happen. But there's more to it than just that. It's not so much the result, but just being there for what is, yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to share that just to share this, this is sort of what the work looks like for us over here. And thank you for that. I've watched that one. In that YouTube clip, there's a quote from a homie. He says, "Homeboys is not a place for second chances. Homeboys is a place for first chances." And that's what I like to see. Like, we also work with probation. We also work with law enforcement. And I was just, I'd like to say that we're doing it right. I'd like to say that we're seeing it more clearly, in the Eightfold Path, this would be right view. We're at this point in the racial reckoning. I saw this meme that sort of kind of captured maybe the concerns of where some of us are at with, it's great that Juneteenth, right, which just passed, it's great that Juneteenth will become a federal holiday, but let's not skip over all the work that still needs to be done. Yeah. So I just wanted to share just some about myself. So I'm Korean American. I grew up in the Los Angeles area. My father and mother, my dad and mom are from Korea. They were born and raised there. And my dad, when my grandfather, his dad, was abducted by North Korean troops during the Korean War. And my dad was 11 and he witnessed my grandfather being taken away by North Korean troops. He was taken to a local jail. And the last instructions that my grandmother and my dad were given were bring winter clothing, because they were going to take him somewhere else. And so they did that, and there was never a trace afterwards, like, was ever heard from again. And my father sort of kind of took the role of not quite provider, but worked towards that. And they were very poor. So in that area, the only, let's say, services that were available were provided by missionaries, by Christian missionaries. So he went there and he learned some English, and he also was fed there. And in that process, he became Christian. So he was the first in our family to convert. Prior to that, we were Confucianist Buddhist. And my father was able to scholarship and then come to the United States and study at the University of Southern California, but dropped out because he could not afford tuition, and then became a dry cleaner. He opened a dry cleaning shop. I think he partnered with somebody. If y'all aren't aware, that's sort of the Korean American get down. Like, they become dry cleaners. That becomes like the primary business. Yeah. So then we were raised Christian. But for me, I'm so just, I should say, just Chenshin Han's book, Be the Refuge, in the timing and it's just all of it, this kind of kismet of its emergence, it's just been this godsend. It's like this, it validates this like whole life experience for so many of us. And so in that regard, so I wouldn't say that I'm a convert to Buddhism. I would maybe more accurately, sure, there's a conventional usage of that word, but something more about a revert. Yeah. So growing up Christian, it was for being an immigrant in the US, it provided a critical social network. And that's where many of the Korean families, the recent arrivals, went to the Christian church. Yeah. But it taught me about how to be a Korean American, but it didn't teach me anything about Korea. And so I had a troubled youth, and I joined a gang when I was about 13. And I was able through violence, I was able to access a certain power that I'd been thirsty for my whole life. And unfortunately, the first person I ever in a fit of violence really hurt was my own father. And I hit him past the point of consciousness. And I was very young, I was 13. And this resulted in me in being in the street for an extended period of time. And so my high school years, it's foggy, but it was really just getting caught up. And for me, it's what gangs provided for me was a sense of power that I feel had been taken from me. Of course, I wouldn't be able to articulate this prior, but it offered a certain community that I needed my whole life. Yeah, I could be with other people like me. I wouldn't have to hear racial slurs. I wouldn't have to worry about that. I was understood. I immediately de facto fit in. Yeah. And Los Angeles at the time, the area was the gang capital of the entire world. Yeah. So even when the Korean riots happened in 1992, even though I couldn't understand it, still I felt it. There was this profound felt sense about the racial strife that I was surrounded by. Yeah. It felt like everybody was against Koreans during the riots in 92. Yeah. It wasn't just whites. It wasn't just the establishment. It was also blacks. It was also Latinos. Like that was the experience for me. Yeah. And I saw that the ones that were going to defend Koreatown were the gang members. And, and the elders, that's the perception that I saw. Yeah. So I would say that during the teens and 20s, even just the teens, it was about kind of being immersed in this gang culture. In the 20s, it was just about being criminal, like the shift of kind of why we're participating and what we're participating in. I grew up with this sense of never good enough. I'm always going to be a second-class citizen. I don't belong anywhere else. I should just stay in these ethnic enclaves, in these Asian neighborhoods. And my sense of wanting to take power back was defined by a desire for revenge. Yeah. And this drove me into deeper and deeper levels of substance addiction. It just became one drug after the other. And eventually the community that gangs provided and all that, it was far overpowered by the desire for euphoria, to numb myself, just to be able to forget everything. Yeah. And over the years, but being also Asian American, it's this amazing thing that I only see occur amongst Asian gang members, is like they can participate in this certain lifestyle but still get straight A's. Like I don't see that in any other. I don't know why that is, but it just is. Yeah, we're just so hardwired to just have school. And so in my sense, in my belief, and also as a result of growing up in the family that I did, it was just do well in school and all will be forgiven. Like that was the message that I got, right? Just figure out school. And I was like many others, the first book I actually read that really planted a seed in me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. That I was in a remedial English class in college, and it just greatly impacted my life. And I had one foot in, one foot out. School was in fits and starts, but I also appreciated it created something. It kind of sparked something in me. Yeah. And also that kind of was the start of interest in social justice. But at the time too, though, the entirety of the anthology of social justice was from Black authors, from Black leaders, and it spoke to me and it touched me in a certain way. But I also was thirsty for those that looked like me, that came from the same culture. Yeah. So I was able to kind of stay abstinent for certain periods of time, and I eventually I got into filmmaking and went to USC for film, and it's a prestigious university. And I remember the first like orientation, there were students from MIT, from the East Coast, from Ivy League, from junior Ivy, etc. And I just felt so out of place. I remember this profound sense of inadequacy. But lo and behold, I had a certain talent for making films. And like kind of creating narrative became this outlet for me that was really important. Yeah. And I still led this reckless other life, and ended up in this motorcycle accident. And as a result of the accident, I had multiple surgeries, and then I got MRSA, and then I got a PICC line put in me. And then at that point, I just slowly descended into a rock bottom. And this was also during this period where pain management was highly emphasized in medicine. So it was alarming to me how easy it was to have OxyContin and these really strong opiates prescribed, like no problem. And I quit all the other drugs, but because I was getting these high dose opiates. But after I finished school, suddenly my sense of structure and everything just collapsed. And it was too expensive to buy what I was hooked on in the street. So it became heroin. And then at that point, it took me down very, very fast, and I hit an absolute bottom. And I was barely a recognizable person at that point. So for myself, I tried to go to 12-step fellowships, but there was a certain racism that was present, and it wasn't necessarily an intentional racism. It was, I wouldn't even really call them microaggressions. It feels too benign of a term. Yeah. It was just this constant theme of like otherizing that I experienced. I was usually the only Asian person present. And it was very hard to feel part of. I felt constantly apart. There's a saying, it says, we say, see the similarities, not the differences. But that experience is not quite the same for BIPOC, because the message that I got was, how could I feel similar when I'm constantly being told that I'm different? And that being told different could be as simple as somebody asking, what is my nationality? It could be as simple as that, or it could be greater, right? Or it could actually be a racial slur. In any case, it didn't stick for me, and I decided that the best solution for me now in my life is to kill myself. I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. It's just been, I can do well for a little bit, and then a bottom comes. It's just right around the corner. So I decided all I had left at that point was my dog, and I had a very close friend who was living in Chicago, and I constructed this whole like scheme. Like, if you know anything about addicts, we can go on these really elaborate and amazing missions and accomplish like amazing things, and just really based on impulsivity and sheer will. So I decided I was going to go drive across the states, give away my dog and to a close friend, and do all these things. And just totally just become as severely intoxicated as I can, and just end my life in New York City. So it was Halloween of 2014, and I was in New York, and I got lost trying to go to my plug, go to my source, and I was in some area of Brooklyn, and I couldn't find the entrance to the subway. And it was like, I think Halloween that year was on a weekend. I think it was on a Saturday. The city was buzzing. And this old man, he probably resents that I say that he's old. I'll say this bit of an older gentleman. He had a really gruff accent. He started walking with me, and he would not stop talking to me. He told me how he was in Skid Row for a number of years. He told me about his prison term. He told me about how members of his family had been murdered. And he was helping me get to the subway. He probably sensed something, yeah. So he directed me to where the subway was, and I let him walk on because I just wanted him to go. I pretended to like look at some street sign or something. And then from across the street in his thick New York accent, he goes, "Hey kid, come over here." So I walked over there. We smoked cigarettes, and he said, "Kid, I'm gonna take you where you need to go." And I said, "Okay." And then he said, "There's a moment," and he asked me, "Why did you come to New York?" And it's just one of those moments where we're willing to share our deepest secret to a complete stranger. I looked at him and I said, "I can't stop using drugs. I came here to kill myself." That's what I told him. And then he looked at me and he said, "Would you believe that I'm a recovering addict?" And then at that point, it was like waterworks. I just completely just broke down. There's just all this pain and suffering that I'd been holding up, just so obsessively set on what I was going to do. And then everything just broke. And we were in this, I still went to the West Village. We were in the subway. They're just all these party goers and revelers in their outrageous costumes. And then it's just me and him. And no matter how loud it was, every word he could say, I could just hear so clearly, yeah? And so at this point, I was not at all interested in 12-step fellowships. And so instead, what this addict in recovery was, he was part of a church that was full of 12-steppers. But at that time, I was so conditioned to believe that in a certain kind of Christianity that I was raised in was that it could only be through church. Anything else is a violation of whatever perverted code that was derived from Leviticus, yeah? So anyway, so then there was a church. I was like, okay. So I went to the church, and he offered, there was a bed and detox. He said, "Please stay." But that time I was just so caught on this pink cloud after that outrageous experience that I said, "Thank you, I'm good. I know what I need to do now. Thank you for that miraculous appointment, that random coincidence. I'm gonna go back to LA now and I'm good. Yeah, I'm so set." And against better judgment, not only myself, but others, I just drove back on my own. And it was about India, which is about a couple hours away. Once I got there, all I could think about was using. And it just took me, it just enslaved me. And I ended up using again. I relapsed. I shouldn't say relapse, because if one isn't in some kind of community or program, it's just called using. It's not called like relapsing, yeah? So in any case, I I was finally to a point where I said, okay, enough is enough. And in order to change, we got to do something different. Yeah. And so at that point, I surrendered and ended up in a 12-step fellowship, which I'm still a part of today. And in that recovery journey, once I was clean of substances, it became absolutely necessary to try, well, for myself, basically every therapy or recovery practice available, because I could not, just the level of anxiety, stress, and symptoms of PTSD, the hypervigilance, it was so loud, it was just impossible to, everything was unmanageable emotionally, mentally, and physically. And I kept hearing about mindfulness practice. Mindfulness this, mindfulness that, TED Talks, just what have you. Just there was just the kind of new buzzword in therapy. And after learning about it more, I said, wait a minute, this is Buddhism. Somehow that message was lost in how it was being conveyed and how I was hearing about it. So and this comes to the point of reversion. I started practicing, and there were fellowships at the time, such as Against the Stream and other lay fellowships, lay sanghas, the kind of the fruits of, let's say, insight. So I was able to find sangha, find community, have a teacher, and practice, and just had a dramatic impact on my life. And once I got to recovery, the first job opportunity was to work for a nonprofit that goes into jails for juvenile incarceration camps. And there I was teaching film. I had a film background, right? So I was teaching film, and that became there was an opportunity to have mindfulness-based healing circles. So I was able to facilitate those. And people ask me, do I miss film sometimes, like friends? And I say, making films was the most fun I've ever had, but doing this work is the most meaningful experience I've ever had. And so being part of those workshops and facilitating those circles, I just knew that I wanted to continue to do that. And our nonprofit lost that particular grant, so we discontinued going into that particular facility. But I knew that at that point I needed to have further training if I wanted to continue. So I was at a kind of crossroads. I said I would either go into social work or into divinity. And so I applied to 2 degrees, and then I got accepted in both, and I couldn't decide. And we have this saying, there's a saying in the 12-step fellowship, it says, if you want to do what I do, you got to do what I did, right? This idea that we just kind of follow in each other's footsteps. So at this kind of crossroads, I was reading and learning about Father Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries. And I saw that in his biography that he received the Master of Divinity. So that decided it for me. So I went that path. And that's how I ended up at University of the West. But and also kind of involved with social justice work, because, to me, I am involved. I mean, I did start off, I am chaplain trained, but to me, it's one thing to kind of work with clients or work with care seekers, but it's another thing to work towards the causes and conditions that are causing the suffering to begin with. Yeah. And to me, that's the work of social justice. So now I'm in this process of starting a nonprofit, lay sangha for Asian Americans. And I'd like to share, though, that before Be the Refuge, a common question was, why only Asian American? But after Be the Refuge, I don't get that question anymore. Yeah. I can now point to a certain thing, like a certain raft has been built now, and there's a consciousness shift, yeah? There's a moray shift, there's an ethos shift, and that's like the importance of like how all of us kind of have a role to play, yeah? But I mean, and also reflecting on the title of this, there was the tragic murder of George Floyd last year in 2020, and all the amazing actions and protests and gatherings as a result. There was we weren't, it was just a group of friends really that meditate together. I just said, you know what, let's do a Buddhist for Black Lives Matter march, yeah? And at this time, there were a lot of marches happening. There were a lot of people that were organizing. I'd never organized anything before, but I said, okay, let's just kind of see what that entails. And there was a certain vision that we were working towards, and I literally called every person that I knew. I called every monastic that I knew, and a colleague and mentor of mine, he let me know. He said, look, I organized something before and I couldn't even get a monk to jaywalk. So I don't know if this is gonna work out for you, yeah? So I was like, okay, and, you know, I heeded his words, but called anyway. And we got about 5 monastics from different traditions. And slowly things started to come together, and started hearing from people that were willing to attend. And in my view, it's like, if our intention is right, and if we're doing this in community, and if our practice, our daily practice is aligned with the vision, then that's all that matters. Whether it's 2 people or 200, that's as long as the practice around it is good, yeah. So we went through with it, and much to our surprise, 500 people showed up, and it was. I'd like to say though that nothing was resolved, right? It's just offering space to what the late Rabbi Abraham Heschel says, to pray with our feet, yeah? So we had the march. And I want to say though that, you know, this is, it was still, for what it was worth, very impactful experience and moment, and it still stays with me with what we can do today, yeah? How all of it matters. And every step, literally every step we take together, yeah. And for the march, we marched from Little Tokyo on this corner where back during World War II, where buses were lined up to take all the Japanese Americans to the concentration camps, yeah, to the internment camps. So we started there, and then we marched in silence, in walking meditation, to City Hall. And I like to say that too, because we all can protest in our own way, yeah? Some can chant, some can yell, and then some can just march in silence. And that was maybe our way or our contribution. And it was beautiful to see. And this was in late spring in 2020, regardless of all the concern and great risk of being in the middle of this pandemic, we still showed up for not only ourselves, but for others, yeah? And some of the organizers were also contributed to May We Gather, which Chen Hong was the facilitator for and was a speaker, and it was amazing moments as well, right? And I want to say even before ours, what was a very inspiring occurrence was seeing members of the Order of Interbeing, I believe somewhere in Southern California, in the San Diego area, they participated in a Black Lives Matter march and took a knee. And that was a critical kind of inspiration for the march that we did, right? And so, you know, the fruits continue to how we convey and carry a message and inspire others. And I also wanted to kind of note, though, I was listening to an interview of an organizer for May We Gather, and in that interview, the individual said, this was the first time that Buddhists from so many different sanghas came together to gather or what have you, right? And in my mind, I was like, no, it's not, because we did a year before. So I say this because even in the efforts to become made visible, some still are at the threat of staying invisible, yeah? Because, you know, for our march, none of us, I mean, the main organizers are ordained. We're not part of any kind of well-known sangha. We're just humble practitioners that were called to a certain action and, you know, participate in this greater effort, yeah. So I think at that point, I think we also have planned. I'm not sure how much time I have, but I've been speaking for a while. I really appreciate everybody's kind of attention, and just very honored to meet with you all. And yeah, thank you.
Wow. Thank you, David, so much. I think every one of us is glued to the Zoom and just listening to your beautiful story, and painful and beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing it. I guess now we have time for some questions. And if people have questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If people don't have a question right away, I have a question, but let's see, maybe Adriana too, or Chenzing wants to ask something.
I just want to thank you, David. It was really inspiring to hear you, especially the clarity you have of yourself and the narrative you are forming of yourself and how you are presenting yourself, and how we can all change and start anew and have a new point of view. So thank you so much, and how the practice of mindfulness can help us to do that, but also learning where this mindfulness practice comes from and who are the people who are living us this tradition. So thank you so much. And I think maybe now, Chenzing, you can leave the question and answer session. What do you think? And I don't know if you want to add something else. Thank you. Thank you, David, again.
Thank you, David, for that.
And Chenzing, only if that feels, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, only if it feels right that you want to do Q&A, but also I see we have Soifa hand up when you're finished. Thanks.
I'm sure. I just wanted to echo your thanks, and just wanted to thank you, David, for the Bodhisattva work that you do in this world. And I give thanks also to the many Bodhisattvas who have supported your work. And after this, I want to hear about the name of that article so we can issue a correction about May We Gather. And I want to make sure Sui Hua has a chance to ask the first question, so please.
Thank you, everyone, for making this happening. I've got two questions, David. One is, you mentioned inner justice. Wondering if you can say a few more words about inner justice. And the second question is this, if you can say a few words about how do we belong? How do we feel belonging, and how do we create that time space for others to feel belonging? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and for your question. So one of the practices that are at the core of this lay sangha that we're pursuing is, it's great to have, I mean, we've benefited, I myself too have benefited so much from the emergence of mindfulness as a practice in the States. But I think for some of us, maybe something has been missing. By the way, I love that story of, I think Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, who is the teacher, right, for many of the Insight founders. And I remember when they were going to bring what they learned in Burma at the time to the States, and we're saying, wow, this amazing practice, like, and what do we call it when we come to the US? Like, we're trying to find a name. This is before mindfulness was ever coined as what it would be called. And then Venerable looked to them and said, well, you could call it Christianity, you know? That's like, that was his answer to him. So I'm not saying it's therefore one and the same. I'm just saying, like, there's something there, right? So now we come and it's mindfulness, but I feel that maybe one thing, it's great that it can kind of merge with Western psychology and become this practice, but maybe one part of Buddhism that gets missed so much is the belief of rebirth and reincarnation. Yeah, it's not such a popular notion. It becomes kind of maybe omitted or forgotten. And then even for mindfulness practice, what is missed at times is that one of the most sacred powers of the Buddha was to remember all of his previous incarnations. Yeah. And my interpretation of that is, and this relates to inner justice, is there's a difference between just mindfulness where we can just be aware of the present. And for some of us that need to do more than that, where our kind of story, and this is maybe the nature of the talk, is how do we decolonize the narrative, and how do we reclaim the true narrative? Yeah, like that true essence. So cultural mindfulness for us is not just becoming aware of the present, but learning and loving and embracing that past of where we come from. Yeah, and to me that is the heart of what Buddhist practice is, and why I would say that reversion is more accurate. Reversion, reclaimed, yeah, and why I'm able to share anything at all today. So I mean, that's maybe, it's not so much that just mindfulness, but applied mindfulness as relevant to BIPOC or to us. Yeah. So what I say is for inner justice, there's, you know, it's great to participate in the various movements and various actions, and there's definitely agenda items that need to be achieved for the system to be accurate, reflective, what the professor Ian Haney Lopez calls, it's been a Herrenvolk democracy. Yeah, it's been a white supremacist democracy. And how do we change that? How do we have that more accurately reflect the needs of the most vulnerable and the minority, right? But at the same time, to participate in fellowships where I can kind of discover this discover this true self, and be in a safe space to kind of work on these things. And, you know, that to me is inner justice. Yeah. And that's kind of like the difference between just practicing and having a certain applied practice more relevant to our needs, to my needs, with people like me, you know? So yeah, if that kind of answers your question. And then the belonging, Johan Hari, the social scientist, he's done amazing work in writing regarding addiction. he has a book called Chasing the Scream. He says that the opposite of addiction is not abstinence. The opposite of addiction is connection. Yeah. So I was in need of a fellowship that perhaps did not exist. So now the effort for us is to create this fellowship that we've needed. Yeah. So, you know, if the raft does not exist, we'll build one.
Thank you, David. I see Jennifer has a question.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I was wondering, as an Asian American Buddhist, what do you feel like is your relationship with the white convert sanghas, especially coming from the insight traditions, versus the Asian kind of rooted traditions and communities and monastics?
Yeah, it's a very important question. It's also a challenging question. I would say that, you know, I could say this, I can answer maybe different ways, but I think the way I'll choose to answer is say again, related to what maybe some of the themes we've talked about is the who is represented in American Buddhism and who isn't. And that isn't to say that others should close their doors, by no means, definitely not. But it's like, I mean, do they have spaces? And if they do, great. But my concern is not so much regarding that, but more kind of focused on ourselves. Like, do we have a space? Like, that's more of my emphasis, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, and then this also kind of maybe relates to conversations regarding privilege. My work is not to necessarily, or as I see it, necessarily to work with, to kind of tell anybody that maybe comes or represents that demographic what to do with their privilege. I don't come from that background. My work is to work with those that come from underprivilege. Yeah, like I can't. In a way, there's this as just in the kind of spirit of how the Buddha taught was like we kind of maybe work within our own experience first. Yeah. So if that maybe kind of answers your question. Yeah, I mean, everybody has a role to play, and I 100% believe that. So what I see too, that I've been so grateful for, and to me, this is the very spirit of what Father Greg does. If we're up to those that seek his attention and presence, they would just want him. But what Father Greg does, and he's done this his entire life, is he uses all of his available resources to make the gang members be seen. Yeah. And to me, that's just an amazing kind of, just like Chen Xing Han with Be the Refuge. Her entire book is lifting up the voices of those that have not been heard. And to me, that is in itself the work of a bodhisattva, to let others be seen. Because they're kind of, if this is an interpretation of privilege, how I've already been seen my whole life just by nature of being what I've inherited into, then I'm going to use this to let others be seen. And to me, that's privilege in action for social justice. And just like inviting me here, and just even though I was late and still at work, and thank you.
While we wait for the next question, I just want to read what Jessie Zapanta has written in the chat, really appreciating your shining light on your personal experiences and in turn uplifting the experiences of many Asian diaspora folks who get left in the margins. Your story resonates with me and members of my family. Telling our stories, making our experiences visible is so important. Deep bows.
Annie bowing in. If there's not another question, I'll ask the question that I had, which I'm curious about how much you rely on your practice in your work versus just simple compassion and love.
Yeah, I would say the practice is the foundation to my entire day. Yeah. I don't meditate for jhana. I meditate for manageability, if that makes sense. And I could say, for instance, when I was, let's say, meeting with clients individually, and if they're sharing about, I remember there was this young teen. She was about 15, and she would come in for sessions with cuts in her legs and her arms because she would self-harm. And when I'd see that, I'd just be struck with this. I'd feel so sorry. I'd feel so sad. Yeah. And it'd be so easy just to for that empathy to become sympathy. And as somebody that's been an addict in recovery myself, like I don't want to see pity, and I don't want to give pity. That's just, it's. So even in those situations, mindfulness of the breath and body, I could, in that same, it was in a cell that was about maybe 6 by 6 feet, but in the distance, there were these amazing tall eucalyptus trees, and they would just catch the breeze. Yeah. But just kind of using the surroundings just to detach just enough to be more present to the room, for instance. Yeah. So in any case, just the practice ever informs the day-to-day, all the interactions, and something kind of amazing happens where the meditation just blends into post-meditation. Yeah. And then chanting and prayer becomes just a constant companion throughout the day. Yeah. So I for myself, I always sometime before my first cup of tea and brushing my teeth, there's always like a time where I just sit no matter how busy. I remember there was the great reformer, Martin Luther. There's a quote by him. He says, I'm going to be extremely busy today, so I must pray for at least 2 hours. Right? Like this, he's saying the more busy I am, the more I need to pray. Right? And I think that is definitely, something that I try to practice. Am I always successful at it? No. But I think Sharon Salzberg also says, what does she say? She says, a main component of sitting meditation is to work with this conditioned accumulative mind, right? It's not how many minutes I do it, it's just that I do it. And then looking at what arises as a result. So yeah, this isn't in the Vinaya, but I'm definitely one that practices good enough meditation at times. So.
Thank you so much. Do we have other people with questions?
I can also ask a question. and I was smart. I want to share with you what I was thinking when you were sharing and about this difference of the white leading sanghas. And I always think, because I work with immigrants from Latin America, and how helpful will be for these communities of immigrants to practice Buddhism. But it's really difficult to bring the practice to these communities for two things, because they are scared of the presence of the whites and the colonialists and all these spaces, maybe not rationally, but it's there. It's really like scaring for one reason. And the other barrier that I think I have encountered is to think that Christianism and Buddhism can go together. So, and you are a practitioner of both, really like believing in both traditions. So how will you explain to someone who is afraid of entering the Buddhism and mindfulness work because of these barriers with Christianism, how to explain that you can combine those, and that's the perfect, for me, it's a perfect practice to have both spiritual practices.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely wanted to maybe reference a classic that's just ever kind of useful in this anything related to maybe spiritual encounters or spiritual formation. James Fowler, Stages of Faith. Always, ever since kind of that book, just this idea of like psycho-spiritual development. Anyway, so I also work at a Christian faith-based rehabilitation mental health inpatient center in Koreatown, Los Angeles. And so I'm also still part of the Korean American community, and I encounter that. My God bless her, my own mother, just thinks that like, why Buddhism? You know, please don't. If I do a kasho or Anjali, she's like, don't do that, you know, right? But she just has a certain, she was raised in a certain understanding, and you know, she's come to this. And there's the Father Greg says kindness is the only strength there is. And I understand kind of that belief, and I understand maybe the conditions for why that belief is there. Even for myself, a big influence for myself to kind of be able to openly or embrace Buddhist practice was because I was raised in that as well. Like, one can't be both. And but then I've been Roshi Wendy Egyoku, she says, she calls this the koan of our lives. Yeah. So for myself, I was also raised in this struggle at times when I was younger. Am I either Korean or am I American? I can't be both, right? And hearing that throughout my life. So again, then it manifested as, am I either Christian or am I Buddhist? You can't be both. But then who says that, right? Like, I don't need to believe that false narrative anymore. I remember while I was listening one day to Father Greg, and he was being interviewed by Terry Gross, of course, from Fresh Air, and she was asking him how he chooses to meditate or what his practice is daily, and Father Greg responds, "Oh, I like to steal away and for 10 minutes in the middle of the day and repeat a mantra to myself." And then Terry Gross says, "Wow, that sounds very Buddhist." And Father Greg, of course, he's a Jesuit priest. He goes, "Shh, don't tell anybody." Yeah. But still, like, this idea of somebody that's this ordained Jesuit priest and been part of the church for decades, yet he's spiritually fluid enough to also incorporate Buddhist practice. Yeah. But he's also quite specific in his own tradition too, right? So I see this also as this kind of practice of decolonizing our mind and the conditions where I didn't really choose Buddhism or Christianity. I didn't choose to be Korean or American. They're both just part of me, and it's about honoring that, yeah. And this, okay, again, though, I'm just speaking about myself. I'm not speaking for anyone else's experiences. I really want to iterate that. This is just kind of what the journey has been like for myself. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
There's such a strength in that kind of both rootedness and fluidity. I'm thinking of those eucalyptus trees. So I think we have a few more minutes, and I just wanted to lift up two things in the chat, just speaking them for the recording too. Anne writes, I appreciate you speaking to the value in being able to walk in multiple spaces rather than feel limited to one end of a binary. Peter, I love this phrase, spiritually fluid, the counterpoint to either this or that. I think Buddhism really invites us to think beyond many, many binaries, in fact. And then I also see a question, so I want to make sure to lift that. Christine asks, what books and readings have shaped your Buddhist practices?
Oh yeah, thank you. Definitely the books that I've mentioned. I'm so many, but yeah, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh has been a major influence, and it just, maybe I could also say though that it's very special to read in community and not just on my own. And there's something about that. The highlights of maybe during this pandemic has been, I'll grab tea we'll have virtual tea with Chen Qing, and we'll just talk about the random things that we've read or have encountered in our lives. And the spirit records, it just kind of remembers, yeah. So I'm also saying that because, what else? Definitely the books that I've already mentioned. Thich Nhat Hanh, Living Buddha, Living Christ, is definitely a favorite. This is what I have right here. It's Stepping into Freedom. Thich Nhat Hanh. This one I love, just how he has the first, he opens with the gathas for the practice of daily use. Just these phrases that we can use in our daily lives. Anyway, it's a bit of a digression, but this is what's definitely something that I kind of carry with me as just like basic text for daily life. Yeah, what else is around me? Yeah. If that answers the question.
Well, speaking of spiritual fluidity, I feel this is a great book for influencing Buddhist practices that you recommended, Tattoos on the Heart. I have annotated it. I think it's the first time I annotated, there's just hearts everywhere. And I'm like, that's so Buddhist, even though it's written by, a Jesuit priest. So there's so many books. And I love what you say about reading in community, that I think also I love reading, recommendations from friends, because I think there's just something that now whoever in this group picks up this book will have this connection to you, to Homeboy, to Father Gregory. And I think what I loved so much about this book is just there's so much, I think, in it. There's such heaviness, but also such joy, humor. And I guess if I can selfishly ask a question, I'm thinking about your story that you told at the beginning, and that meal with, in a way that youth's legacy is that cooking workshop. But I think I just wonder, I could see just from all of us here in the gallery, those of us with our video on, how much it struck us. I think there's been so much grief. I mean, really, in our lives, in our ancestors' lives and lifetimes, that's one way to think about it. There's joy too, there's resilience. But I guess staying for a moment with that grief, I'm just curious how you make room enough for the grief, for how to not let that grief take over the humor, the joy, everything else.
Yeah, thank you, Chen Qing. I would maybe, to answer honestly, sometimes that grief does take over. Yeah, definitely, without question, and especially now. And to me, with all that's happened is continues to happen is what even before the pandemic, there was what, maybe over 50,000 souls that die daily, mostly from preventable reasons, mostly children from hunger. And I think in a lot of ways, grief is the accurate or the realistic response. But I think regardless of what we experience, again, it's more the practice surrounding the grief and grieving together, I think, is the critical component. And I think also from the background that I have, it was suffer and suffer quietly and suffer alone. Yeah. And I think the kind of interdependent practice of Buddhism is to face one another and to do it together. And I think that's the most important part of the practice, regardless of how we're feeling. But then also, of course, it's important for the space to be receiving and kind of have the maybe spiritual maturity to be present with what actually is arising. But it's challenging. It's definitely hard. And I'm so thankful to kind of to be under spiritual direction and have mentorship and have peers that I can turn to and yeah, definitely I understand. And it's still here. Yeah, we're still in it. We're still going through it. So I think spaces like this coming together where we just can share from the heart and be open with one another and honor each other's kind of lives and experiences and insights. It's not just a beautiful thing, it's a miraculous thing. And yeah. By the way, I just wanted to say hi to Phil and how he's doing. Yeah. So yeah.
So thank you so much. I don't know if we have time. I don't think we have time for another question. Oh, there's a wonderful question in the chat. I'll just read it out and maybe there's a short answer, but I doubt it. How has your practice helped you deal with the othering that occurs in majority white Sangha and othering among BIPOC people? From Rhonda. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Oh yeah, right here. How has your practice helped you deal with the
othering, sorry, where is it? The othering that occurs in majority white Sangha and othering among BIPOC people.
Yeah, this is like this is like the heart of everything that I'm doing right now. I'm totally just saying, I hear you, I understand. If you're also saying you've experienced this, then me too, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is just, again, this maybe relates to the importance of having space where we can process and work through this, continuing trauma and anger and frustration. Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's like the difference, the difference between calling out and calling in, and then working around that. It can be so hard. Yeah. Well, I could say one thing. This is definitely the bane. I want to say this. I know we're at time, but kind of the bane of my work these days is like just the predominance of digital-based communication, like having really, really important conversations via text and social media commenting. It's like, and how to get away from that, because I find that to be not a healthy practice, and maybe not practicing right speech, like having this, like where we're talking, facing one another, and ideally being in person for these conversations. Yeah, I find that to be a major impediment to doing this work and being in this movement and so forth. Not to say that it has no use, yeah. It's just like, yes, I mean, we learn to live in the gray and to the non-black and white, but there still is a use for black and white. There still is a use for that. There still is a use for social media, yada, 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 yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Well, I think it's extraordinary, David. I just feel that when you're in a digital space, this is my experience with you, and I suspect other people in this meeting, in this gathering, feel this way, that you have a way of making this digital space feel like we're in person. There's a real intimacy and vulnerability and opening. And I think there are so many more questions, but we want to respect your time, and we know you've had a long day from work too. So hopefully we'll save these questions in the chat, as you so beautifully put it. These are seeds for more conversations, more openings. And I hope the karmic conditions will support us all in gathering together in person someday soon. And just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Shansing, and thank you, David. Go ahead, Annie. And I think we will have some announcements, and we will always close. We always close with a bell. So I think, Annie, what do you want to do first? Announcements or the bell?
Sure. Why don't do you want to just say the announcement for our next session? Did you want to go ahead and share that? And also thank you to Chenzing and David. Chenzing, appreciate you being part of this again. Thank you.
And
So,
also thanking Don. Don is our closed captioner, and he's here and he's amazing. And Claire is here also. She managed our social media of Making Visible. Thank you so much. And I think maybe Shen Think is the best person to talk about our next session, because she's the curator of our series and we are in this series right now. Why don't you tell us something, Chancing, about our next session?
Sure, I'll just speak briefly. An Tran will be our next speaker. I think he was on earlier, but maybe he had to go. So I don't actually know, Adriana and Annie, if the date has been set yet, the date and time, but I came to know through a powerful article he wrote in Lit Hub on cultural appropriation, and was just on a panel with him and Kazi Shakti Adi for Ed's session on that really highlighted in celebration of Pride Month. It's called The Dharma of Pose. So for those of you who've seen that show. So I don't know exactly what An will share, but I'm sure it will be really fascinating as well. And I hope that we can gather again in the next month together to learn from An.
thank you, Chenzing. I posted in the chat our website, but also that it's Wednesday, July 28th is the next talk with Antran. So any other announcements? Anything else before our final bell?
No, just if you can go and navigate our website, you will find all the topics that Making Visible has touched before. So we have all the recordings there, and this recording will be there. You will receive it, but it's also gonna be there. What we want to have is Making Visible